Welcome to the Evolution of Consciousness channel.
The term occultism is one of those that is often misunderstood. For the uninformed, until recently, it was synonymous with magic. Believing that occultists practiced the dark arts, dressed in crimson robes covered with kabbalistic symbols, and in their eerie surroundings, an indispensable attribute of which was a black cat. They used satanic spells to concoct their terrible potions. And even now, among those who have risen above such prejudices, there is still a lack of understanding. The fact that the word occultism comes from the Latin occultus, meaning hidden, should immediately explain to them that it is the science of the hidden, but they often contemptuously dismiss it as nonsense and an impractical pursuit, associated with dream interpretation, fortune-telling, hysteria, necromancy, and the search for the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone. Those researchers who are supposed to know better speak as if the hidden side of things is deliberately concealed, and knowledge of it, which should be the property of all people, is deliberately withheld because of the whims or selfishness of a few. The fact is that nothing is hidden from us, nor can it be hidden by anything except our own limitations, and for each person, as they develop, the world becomes wider and wider, as they can see more and more of its splendor and beauty. As an objection to the above, one may cite the well-known fact that at each of the great initiations, marking the neophyte's progress along the path of higher advancement, he is imparted with certain knowledge. This is quite true, but the knowledge is given to him only because he has developed to the point where he can assimilate it. It is no more hidden from ordinary people than knowledge of conic sections is hidden from a child who is still struggling with the multiplication table. When he reaches the level where he can understand quadratic equations, the teacher will be ready to explain the relevant rules to him. In exactly the same way, when a person has made himself fit to receive the information given at a certain initiation, he is initiated into it. And the only way to achieve the ability to absorb this higher knowledge is to try to understand our current conditions and wisely direct our lives based on the facts we have discovered. Occultism is precisely the study of the hidden side of nature, or rather, the study of nature in its entirety, and not just the small part of it that falls under the investigation of modern science. At the present stage of our development, a much larger part of nature remains completely unknown to most members of the human race, since they have not revealed even a small fraction of the abilities they possess. Therefore, the average person bases their philosophy, if they have one at all, on completely inadequate principles. Their actions are more or less in accordance only with the few laws of nature that are known to them, and therefore both their theory of life and their daily practice inevitably turn out to be incorrect. The occultist, on the other hand, has a more comprehensive view. He takes into account the forces of the higher worlds, whose action is hidden from the materialist, and leads his life in accordance with the complete code of natural laws, rather than with random and fragmentary excerpts from it. It is difficult for a person who knows nothing about the occult to realize how great, how serious, and how comprehensive his own limitations are. The only way to give this an adequate symbol is to imagine a form of consciousness even more limited than our own, and to think about how it differs from ours. Imagine that it were possible to have a consciousness capable of perceiving only solid matter, while liquid and gaseous forms of matter did not exist for it. Just as etheric, astral, and mental forms do not exist for the ordinary human being, we can easily see that for such a consciousness, any adequate representation of the world in which we live would be impossible. This consciousness would constantly discover that solid matter, which is the only thing it perceives, is constantly undergoing serious changes that cannot be explained by any rational theory. For example, every time after rain, the earth undergoes a change. Saturated with moisture, it becomes heavier and softer, but to the consciousness we have imagined, the reason for this would inevitably be completely incomprehensible. The wind can lift clouds of sand and carry them from place to place, but for someone who has no concept of the existence of air, such movement of solid matter would be completely inexplicable. And without further examples of what is already so obvious, we can clearly see how hopelessly inadequate a conception of the world would be for a consciousness limited only to solid matter. But what we do not realize so easily is that our current consciousness is as inferior to the consciousness of a developed human being as this imaginary consciousness is inferior to the one we possess now. Those who study theosophy are at least theoretically familiar with the idea that everything has a hidden side, and they also know that in the vast majority of cases, this invisible side is far more important than what is visible to the physical eye. The same idea can be presented from another point of view. The senses, with the help of which we obtain information about all external objects, are not yet fully developed, and therefore the information obtained is only partial. What we see in the world around us is not all that can be seen, and a person who takes on the task of cultivating their senses will discover that, as they succeed in this, life becomes richer and fuller for them. For those who love nature, art, and music, a vast field of unimaginably heightened and exalted pleasures can open up, if only they prepare themselves to enter it. But, above all, those who love their fellow human beings will have the opportunity to understand them much more closely and therefore be much more useful to them. We are still halfway up the evolutionary ladder, so our senses are only half developed. But we can hurry things along and, through painstaking work, make our senses now what they will be for all people only in the distant future. A person who has achieved this is often called a seer or clairvoyant. Clairvoyant is an excellent word, but although it means someone who sees clearly, it has been terribly abused and so debased that people often associate it with all kinds of trickery and imposture. Clairvoyance is associated by many with gypsies who predict the color of the hair of the prince who will come and marry a young girl, or with establishments on Bond Street where the veil of the future is lifted for more aristocratic clients. All of this, of course, is unscientific and incorrect, and in many cases simply charlatanism and outright robbery. But not always. It is indeed possible to foresee the future to a certain extent. This has been done many times, and some of these haphazard practitioners have occasionally managed to obtain glimpses of higher vision, although they usually cannot rely on them whenever they want. Nevertheless, behind all this confusion, there is solid ground of facts, something that can be approached rationally and studied scientifically. And as a result of many years of such study and experimentation in this field, it can be stated with complete confidence. It is quite possible to develop one's senses to such an extent that one can see much more of the amazing and beautiful world in which we live than the average unprepared person could ever imagine, living contentedly in Sumerian darkness and calling it light. 2,500 years ago, the greatest of the Indian teachers, Gautama Buddha, said to his disciples, "Do not lament, do not cry, do not pray, but open your eyes and see. Truth is all around you, if only you remove the blindfold from your eyes and look, and it is so amazing, so beautiful, and exceeds the limits of anything that a person could ever dream of, and it is eternal." Undoubtedly, he had something more in mind than what is described here, but it is still a step toward that magnificent goal of perfect awareness. And if it does not reveal the whole truth, it will in any case give us a significant part of it. It will rid us of the hordes of common misconceptions and clarify many things that those who are not yet versed in this science consider mysteries or unsolvable problems. It will show that all these things were mysteries and problems for us only because until now we have seen only a small part of the facts and considered many subjects from below as separate and unconnected fragments, instead of rising above them to the point of view from which they are understood as parts of a group. In an instant, this will resolve many questions that have been so hotly debated. For example, the continuous existence of man after death. It will explain many strange things that the Church tells us about, dispelling ignorance and fear of the unknown, providing us with a rational and orderly scheme. In addition, a new world will open up to us in our daily lives, a new world that is nevertheless part of the old one. This will show us that, as has already been said, everything has a hidden side, and that our most ordinary actions often produce results that we would never have known about without this research. We will understand the principle of what is commonly called telepathy, as we will see that, along with waves of heat, light, and electricity, there are waves produced by thought, although they propagate in a more subtle type of matter than the others, and are therefore inaccessible to our physical senses. By studying these vibrations, we will see how thought works, and learn that it is a gigantic force that can be used for good or for harm, and which we all use to some extent unconsciously, and could use 1,000 times more effectively if we understood how it works. Further research will reveal to us the method of forming what are called thought forms, and show how they can be usefully applied, both for ourselves and for others, in a dozen different ways. The occultist carefully studies all these invisible effects, and therefore knows the results of what he does much more fully than other people. He has more information about life than others, and, using common sense, he changes his life in accordance with this knowledge. Our life differs in many ways from the life of our medieval ancestors, precisely because we know more than they did. We have discovered certain laws of hygiene, and reasonable people live according to this knowledge, and therefore the average life expectancy has definitely increased compared to the Middle Ages. There are still those who are so foolish or ignorant that they do not know the rules of health, or do not attach any importance to them, not believing in these new ideas. Such people are the first to suffer when an epidemic strikes or some other calamity befalls society. They suffer unnecessarily because they have fallen behind the times, but by their negligence, they harm not only themselves. The conditions created by their ignorance or carelessness often carry infection into areas that would otherwise be free of it. So what we are talking about here is exactly the same thing, only on a different level. The microscope discovered the germs of disease, and the intelligent person benefited from this discovery and changed his life, while the unintelligent person paid no attention to it and continued to live as before. Clairvoyance reveals to us the power of thought and many other previously unknown powers, and the intelligent person again benefits from this discovery and rebuilds their life. And again, the unintelligent person pays no attention to new discoveries, believing that what they cannot see is of no importance to them, and again they continue to suffer unnecessarily because they have fallen behind the times. Not only do they experience obvious pain, but they also miss out on many pleasures in life. In painting, music, poetry, literature, and the beauty of nature, there is always a hidden side, a fullness and completeness that is beyond the physical, and the person who can see or feel it gains access to pleasures far beyond the understanding of people who pass through it all with an undiscovered perception. These abilities of perception are present in every human being, but in most people they are undeveloped. It usually takes a lot of time and hard work to reveal them, but it is worth it and will pay off handsomely. However, no one whose motives are not completely pure and selfless should be allowed to undertake these efforts, because for those who seek broader abilities for purposes other than the most noble, they will be a curse rather than a blessing. Nevertheless, a business person who does not have time for persistent efforts to reveal their innate abilities is not entirely deprived of at least some of the benefits that occult studies provide. After all, even those who do not have a microscope can still observe hygiene. Although the latter cannot see bacteria, he has heard from experts that they exist and how to protect himself from them. In the same way, a person who has not yet developed clairvoyance can study the works of those who have already acquired it and thus benefit from the results of their labors. It is true that they will not yet be able to see all the splendor and beauty that are hidden from us by the imperfection of our senses, but they can easily learn to avoid invisible evil and activate invisible forces of good. Thus, long before he sees them, he can be convinced of their existence by inference, just as someone who uses an electric motor is convinced of the existence of electricity, even though he has never seen it and has no idea what it is. We must try to understand the world in which we live as much as we can. We must not lag behind evolution and allow ourselves to become anachronisms because of a lack of interest in those new discoveries that only present the most ancient wisdom from a new perspective. In this case, as in any other, knowledge is power, and as everywhere else, to achieve the best results, the magnificent trinity of power, wisdom, and love must go hand in hand here. Nevertheless, there is a difference between theoretical knowledge and practical implementation, and it is possible that in order to come closer to understanding the realities of life, it would be useful for students to have a description of the invisible side of some simple phenomena of everyday life, as they are seen by someone who has developed the ability to perceive through the astral, mental, and causative bodies. Their perception by an intuitive guide is infinitely more magnificent and useful, but it is so inexpressible that it seems useless to say anything about it. Since the whole experience takes place inside the person, not outside, and this magnificence and beauty appear not as something he observes with interest, but as something he feels in his very heart, because it is part of himself. On that note, friends, we conclude this episode. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Live in harmony with the world around you. For those who wish to support the author of the channel with a donation, all the necessary information is in the description below the video.